Hey everybody, welcome to day 4 of the iOS 101 course. This lesson today is going to be about loops and functions, but actually today I'm not going to be teaching. We have a guest teacher today. So I just wanted to introduce him quickly, and then he's going to take over and do your lesson. His name is Johnny Hicks, and he is an iOS developer at day 1. I think you're really going to like him. So please give him your attention, and I'll give it to Johnny.
All right, can everybody hear me now? Is that working? You good? Okay, cool. All righty. Well, hello everybody. I am looking forward to teaching you today. And Andrew, thanks for the introduction. As he said, I'm an iOS engineer here at Day One Journal. If any of you have ever used that app, I've been here for about 6 months now, and video is still on Andrew, huh? Let's see. Is that still true? Oh, it's me. Okay. All right. Thanks, AJ. Yeah, so I've been here at Day One for about 6 months, and about a year ago, I was in a similar position as most of you, where I wanted to become a programmer, and I decided to go to a boot camp. And I actually learned how to become a programmer from Andrew and from a couple of the other people that work there at Lambda. So just know that you're in good hands and that you can be successful. You may feel pretty new right now, and but you guys seem to be doing really well. And I've been observing the Slack channels, and you guys are doing a great job helping each other and learning together. So that's awesome. Like Andrew said, we're going to go ahead and talk about loops and functions today, which I am super excited about. Because I find them to be some of the most interesting things in programming, and the things that you use most to solve problems. So first off, I want to talk about what is a loop. As a loop in anything is something that goes around, right? And so a loop in programming is used to loop through a specific function multiple times. So let's say, for example, that I wanted to create a print statement that printed the numbers 1 through 100. Let me go ahead and share my screen here, get that working before we jump too far into this. Okay. All right. Well, let me get that out of the way. Speaking of loops, you probably see a loop right now on my screen showing you my desktop a million times. Let's pull that off too. Okay. Can everybody see my screen okay? Did that come through? I guess you guys will let me know. And okay. Okay, great. Thanks, guys. Andrew informed me that I need to make the text a little bit bigger. Sorry about that, guys. So let me go ahead and open up my Xcode preferences here, and let's go ahead and do presentation large. Is that better? Does that work for everyone? Okay, great. All right. So as I was talking about, let's say, for example, that I wanted to essentially print out numbers 1 through 100. With what we've learned thus far, we've become familiarized with the print statement. So I could go ahead and I could print 1 and print 2. But obviously printing 1 through 100 would be a pretty tedious process. And so that is where loops will come in. And let's hope my simulator is working. Sorry, guys, I know you were having some issues with simulator before. And I will probably have the same issues. It says it's running, but it's not running. Okay, let me go ahead and just exit out of this. And there's in the picture of my family. Let's go ahead and open this up again and make it full screen. And what do we got here? Okay, how are we looking? So I'm set on manual, which will hopefully help us. But I should probably open up my, oh, that's why I don't even have my console open. Okay, I think that's gonna work now. You know what? Okay, cool. Sorry guys, sorry about those technical difficulties. I'm gonna reset here. Go into Xcode again. And let's go ahead and do a new playground. And Andrew is recommending a Mac OS playground. So let's do that. Okay. Okay. Perfect. Now let me open up the console and okay, we're in business. All right, sorry about that, guys. So as I was saying, what we're wanting to do is essentially use a loop to iterate through, say, a range of numbers. So what you've learned so far, we can print 1, we could print 2, but that would be a tedious process. We don't really want to have to go through writing 100 print statements. So that is where a loop is going to come in play. And the simplest form of a loop in Swift, there are two kinds. There's a for loop and a while loop, and we'll talk about both of them. But the simplest loop is going to be a for loop. And to start out a for loop, you obviously start with for, and then the next part of this loop is going to be naming a variable. So for example, I'll just say for x in, and then we pick our range here. So I'll say 1 to 100. Okay, for x in 1 to 100, and then I'm going to surround that in brackets. And then inside these brackets, we're going to go ahead and decide what we want to do with our variable. So this right here, this is your variable. You can name that to be whatever you want. It could be x. I could do for number in 1 to 100. It doesn't really matter. But I can go ahead here and say, okay, so for number in 1 to 100, I would like to print my number. Then if you pull up your log here, you'll see that it quickly printed out 1 through 100 for us. So that's the beauty of loops in a really simple fashion. Allows us to quickly run some sort of code on multiple times or on multiple objects if we need it to. So so that's a for loop. As I talked about here, this is going to be the name of your variable. There are cases when you can leave that blank, and to do so, you can put an underscore. Now, I would only recommend that if in your for loop, you're not actually doing anything with your variable. So let's say maybe I wanted to print my name 100 times. Well, I don't want to print a number anymore. I'd rather just print my name. So I'll go ahead and do print Johnny. And so that will loop through it 100 times. And I don't need a variable name because I'm not making any changes to that variable. So let's go ahead and let's do a few more examples of these for loops. Let me get rid of these statements so they don't get in the way of, because we're going to be printing out a lot of things today. Okay, so let's say, for example, that I have an array, which you guys will learn about arrays and collections um, a little bit further down the road. But let's say I have an array of friends. And so I'll go ahead and do friends, and this is going to be an array of strings. And I'm going to say, okay, so I've got my friend Nelly, I've got Taylor, I've got Caleb, let's say Andrew here. Okay. So here I've got an array of 4 different people. And let's say I want to create a for loop to say hi to each one of them. Now I could, I could go and say print hi Nelly, but in cases here, we can just go ahead and use a for loop. So I'm going to go for friend, and again, I can name this anything I want to. For friend in my friends array, let's go ahead and print hi. And then this is another thing that you guys will talk about. But this is going to be string interpolation, which essentially allows me to take an object and throw it into the middle of the string. You learned about concatenation, I think, a day ago, but I'm going to use a little interpolation here and say hi, and then bring in my friend here. So then it will loop through all of my friends in the array. And am I stuck again? Oh man, sorry guys. Looks like I'm stuck again. I shouldn't have introduced arrays. Let's try this again. Okay. Open up Bugger. Okay, there you go. So now you can see in my console that it went through each item in my array and printed out the name along with hi. So hi Nelly, hi Taylor, hi Caleb, hi Andrew. So you can see there's a lot of power behind running these for loops that saves you a lot of time. As you're working with multiple variables or multiple numbers, or you need to do something a certain number of times. So another thing, just want a quick note that you'll see as you're dealing with these arrays, or not arrays, with for loops, is there's often times where you'll see for, let's say for number of, let's see. Okay. I'm going to say that, for example, for number in 1 to 100, print number. And so this is another thing that you'll probably see as you look through different code, is that you actually have this dot less than alligator. And essentially what this is saying is print the number, this number of times up till that number. And I was anticipating, oh, let's see, let me set this to manual mode before I get stuck again. Okay. So a question might be, well, when would you ever do this? Like, why would I not just do 1 to 99 instead of 1 to less than 100? And so you may think, like, maybe if you were a developer for a game, let's say, for example, that you had, for, I'm just going to leave this as an empty variable, for, sorry guys, variable, we're going to set up number of lives equals 10. Okay, so I'm making a game and my character has 10 lives. And we want to know if we want our character to give us feedback and tell us if he's still alive throughout the game, right? So I'm going to say for 1 less than number of lives, go ahead and print I'm still alive. And so we would expect the character in our game to essentially give us feedback and tell us that he's still alive up until he is no longer alive. And so up until he reaches his limit of lives. So anyway, that's just something we quick wanted to review. You probably won't use this a ton, but you'll see it in a few cases. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the modulo operator that you guys talked about with Andrew. Because we want to do a quick challenge. We're going to create a for loop that prints all of the numbers 1 to 100, so like we've already done, but we want to only see the numbers that are divisible by 3 using an if statement. Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to set up our for loop here. So get rid of this. And we're going to say for number in 1 to 100. Okay, so we've got our for loop set up that we're going to iterate through numbers 1 to 100, but I only want to see the numbers that are divisible by 3. And so you'll remember that the modulo operator, which we signify through a percent sign, essentially allows you to find the divisibility of numbers. So let's say for number in 1 to 100, if my number modulo 3 is equal to 0, then go ahead and print my number. Okay. So the modulo operator, again, essentially allows us to check divisibility. And let me run this. And you'll see that now we've got all of the multiples of 3 here in our code. Okay. So there's another way that we can say this. We can use if statements, which you guys are familiar with, but also with for loops, you can use a where operator. So for example, for the same example, I could say for number in 1 to 100, and then I can add this where clause and say where number modulo 3 is equal to 0. Print my number. And we'll run that. Okay. So again, we've looped through, and get rid of this so that it's not printing it twice. And run this again. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we can either do it either way. Either way, we'll do the exact same thing. Maybe this where looks a little bit cleaner, but you can also use if statements, and you'll probably need more if statements if you're checking on multiple conditions. Okay, so now let's go ahead and talk about a while loop, which is the other type of loop that you would see when using Swift. So for example, I'm going to say I have a variable, and my variable is going to be equal to 10. I'm going to go ahead and say while x is greater than 0, print off nice work. Okay. Now, some of you have probably seen this is going to cause me some problems. I'm not going to hit the play button because if I do, what will happen is I will hit what's called an infinite loop. And that is one thing to be careful about when you're using these loops, is it is possible to hit an infinite loop and it will essentially make your app freeze or crash. And we don't want any of that. And so the reason that this is an infinite loop is that our variable x is always going to be greater than 0 in this case, right? Because we've got our variable x is equal to 10, but we're not actually doing anything to modify x. So what we can do to make sure that this isn't an infinite loop is let's go ahead and say, okay, so while x is greater than 0, print nice work, but then I want to take my x variable and I want to subtract 1 from it, okay? And you probably haven't reviewed this yet, so I'll go ahead and say let x, let's do x equals x minus 1. So essentially what I just showed you, that the two will do the same thing, is I can have this, which just is setting x equal to itself minus 1, and it will iterate through the loop multiple times. Or for a little shortcut, we can just do x minus, minus equals 1. Essentially does the same thing, which takes my x variable and subtracts 1 from it. So now I can go ahead and I can hit play here, and you'll see that it prints out nice work 10 times up until x equals 0. All righty. Just check question. Nope, we're good here. Okay. So let's go ahead and go through another one of these while loops. Again, not as common as a for loop, but still something that you would use. Just be careful that when you are using these while loops, you're making sure that you're not going to be stuck in an infinite loop. Make sure that you're doing something to modify your variable so that while will eventually equal false. Otherwise, you'll be stuck in a loop. So I'm going to go ahead and go through one more for you guys. And let's say that I want to, let's see, we have a couple of questions. Can you do like in JS? I believe, so Jeffrey, in answer, or sorry, Boomer, in answer to your question, I believe that was deprecated in Swift 3. So yeah, I don't think you'll be able to do it in cases here where we're using Swift 4. And Jesse, in answer to your question, if you guys can still see my screen, if down here by the play button, there's this little down arrow, you can click manually run or automatically run. Manually run seems to be working better, so I would go ahead and change that just so you're not crashing so often. Okay, so one more example of a while loop is, let's say, for example, that I want to create a function or to create a loop that will wish me a happy holidays every day in December. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's set up a few variables here. So let's say I've got my variable days in December, and that is going to be equal to 31 days. And then let's say I've got variable is December. That's going to be of type bool, and we're going to say, okay, yes, that equals true. So let's set up this while loop. So I'm going to say while is December is equal to true. What do I want to happen? Well, I want it to print happy holidays. Okay. So while December is still true, so if I were to run my code, because I'm not doing anything to my bool here, if I were to run my code, I'd get stuck in an infinite loop. So what I need to do is, it's fine, it can print happy holidays, but now I need to modify my days in December. So let's go ahead and say days in December minus equals 1. Okay. And so now we're actually doing something with my variable. So we're getting closer to a point where we can set the is December to false. And then I'm going to say if days in December is equal to 0, if it's finally January and is December is equal to false. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and run this. And that should print out happy holidays 31 times for each iteration that the number of days in December until a number of days in December is 0, which we will then set is December to false. Okay, so let's go ahead and go through a challenge. I think we've kind of hit this on the nose a number of times. So let's go ahead and move into the challenge. So what I want each of you to do, and we'll take about 10 minutes to do so. Let me just put the challenge up here so that you can all see it. And comment that out. Okay, so I want each of you to, using a for loop, write a program that will print all of the numbers from 0 to 100, but for any number that is evenly divisible by 3, instead of printing that number, print lambda, and for any number divisible by 5, print school. If a number is divisible by both 3 and 5, print lambda school. Okay, so this will hopefully be easy from what we've gone over, but go ahead and take 10 minutes right now to solve this by yourself, and then we will go over it. Cherney, in answer to your comment, yeah, I know we're going through this quickly because we still got to cover functions, which I want to spend some good amount of time on because they are super important in coding. So hopefully we can. If you have any questions about these loops, feel free to ask your mentors, or to send any messages to the Slack channel, and I'll be happy to help you out. Spoiler alert, Jeffrey, huh? I think you'll all see what he's talking about pretty soon. Looks like a lot of answers are coming through already. Let's go ahead and let's go through it together. Okay, so this is a pretty common programming challenge. Probably in any jobs that you apply for. This challenge is usually called FizzBuzz, but we want to, because Lambda School is the best, we wanted to do Lambda School instead. So let's go ahead and run through this together. I know we've got a lot of the answers in the Slack channel, but let's run through it just so that we're all kind of on the same page as we're going through it. So again, the challenge is we want to print numbers 0 to 100. For things that are multiples of 3 and 5, we want to print Lambda School. If it's a multiple of 3, just Lambda, and if it's a multiple of 5, School. Okay, so let's go ahead and start our loop. So for number in 1 to 100, 0 to 100, sorry, 0 to 100. Okay, and some of you might have gotten caught up on this, but we may be tempted to follow the directions as they are and go ahead and start our if statement with 3 and then with 5 and then do 3 and 5, and then we'll see that it's not right as we print to the log. And that is because we need to make sure that we're checking the most number of cases first, whereas numbers like 15 or 30 are going to be multiples of 3 and 5. And if we put our if statement with 3 or 5 before our if statement that has both of them, then essentially we'll already be assigned a term before we get to the correct if statement. So let's go ahead and start with that. So we're going to say if number modulo 3 is equal to 0 and number modulo 5 is equal to 0. What do we want to do with those numbers? Well, we want it to print Lambda, okay, or Lambda School. Okay, and then we want to check our next case, which would be else if number modulo 3 is equal to 0, print Lambda. Okay, then let's add another statement, else if number modulo 5 is equal to 0, print School. Else int our number. Okay, so let's go ahead and run this code. And if we pull up the console here, we will see that our code is working. Perfect. So let's go ahead and, did we have any questions? No questions. I guess we've got quite a few different answers in here. Okay. Cool. So let's go ahead and let's talk about functions. We've gone through loops, but functions are pretty much pivotal when it comes to programming. And functions will allow you to essentially take lines of code and wrap them up into a function that can be used throughout your app. So they actually end up saving us a lot of time and a lot of repeating code. And this is part of like what we call like the dry principle, which means don't repeat yourself. When you're programming, we want to try to write a line of code as little as possible. And we can do that using functions. And one function that you've already seen is this print statement here. So print is actually a function that was built in by Apple. And so there's a lot of behind the scenes stuff going on that's essentially taking the value and sending it to the console and printing it out for you. But that is an example of a function. So let me go ahead and talk about the different parts of a function. Because print is a function that Apple already made for us. But now we're going to learn to make our own functions, which include 3 different things. So in order to create a function, we're simply going to start with func. Simple enough, right? And after we say that we're going to be defining a function here, we need to give the function a name. So here we'll put function name. And then we have parentheses here along with open brackets. So this is a very, very simple structure of a function. So we've got our function name. Inside the parentheses, we have parameters or arguments, which we'll talk about. And then we have the body of our function. So print hi. Okay, so then I can go ahead and to call said function, I can simply type in function. I can type in function name, and run our code. And we see here in the console that it tells us hi. Okay, so that's just a very, very simple run through of the structure of a function. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit more about what I said were parameters or arguments. So functions will allow us to essentially throw any values into it that we may need. So for example, when we use the print function that Apple gives to us, so print, you can see that there it does require a parameter. And so it requires an item any. That's the parameter, and then we can go ahead and we can define, oh, okay, print string. And if we run our code, print string. Okay, so now let's talk about how we can get these parameters, set up these parameters in our own functions. So I'm gonna go ahead and create a function that adds two numbers together. So essentially a little calculator function here. So I'm gonna go ahead and declare my function with func, and then I'm gonna name this function add together. And then instead of leaving these parentheses blank, I'm going to give it parameters. And so obviously adding together, I'm going to take one or more numbers. So in this case, let's go ahead and just do two numbers. So I'll say add together x, which is of type int, and y, which is of type int. Okay, so quick run through on these parameters. So parameters are going to be separated by a comma. You can include as many parameters as you need to make your function work. These function names here, you can give them whatever you want. If I want to do number one, I could, but just for the sake of simplicity, I'll just do x and y. And so we'll do the name of the parameter followed by a semicolon, and then we need to declare what kind of type. And so, Swift is going to want to know, okay, well, I know the name, I know what you're calling this this parameter, but what type does it need to be? And this is part of Swift safety to make sure that we're not passing in parameters that aren't going to meet the requirements of the function. So we've got add together, and we have x and y, and both of them are integers. So let's go ahead and inside the body of our function, this is where we do all the fun stuff. We're going to say let sum equal x plus y. And then I'm going to go ahead and print out sum here. Okay, so now that we have our function set up, you may be wondering, okay, well, why is nothing printing to the console? And that's where we actually need to call our function and pass in these parameters. So let me go down a couple of lines, and we're just going to call our function here, and you'll see that we've got add together as one of our autocomplete functions. And you can see there that it has both of the parameters that we'll need in order to make this function work. So I'll go ahead and double click that, and it will autofill and say, okay, I'm happy to add together anything. You just need to give me two pieces of information. I need what numbers you want to add together. So let's go ahead and say I've got 5 and I've got 8. And let's go ahead and play that. And you'll see that 13. So there you go. We've created our first function. It's a really simple calculator, but a quick run through of the different parts of functions. So I want to just talk briefly about these naming conventions. Let's say, for example, that I want to create another function here. So let's do func say hello to, and then this is going to be of type string. And then we'll say let string equal hello plus. And then if we want to actually use our variable, we would need to call that name, right? Which is going to be 2. So not the most readability here. It's if you were a new programmer coming in and you saw it, you'd be like, okay, two, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So what we have here in functions is we actually have the ability to give these parameters an internal and an external argument name. And essentially these names are going to be what you see when you call the function. So if I have say hello, in this context, saying say hello to string makes a lot of sense. Say hello to Johnny, and we'll print that out, and it will say hello, Johnny. Okay, but when I actually look at the function, I don't want to use this to here because it doesn't make a lot of sense in this context. So what I can do is I can give the function an internal name for this variable. So let's say to name. And that way, instead of using to here, I can do hello plus name. But then when I'm calling my function, so say hello, it's still set to 2. So that's the difference between using external and internal function names. Just to go through briefly, is one will be kind of more, as you're calling these functions, what makes sense. But then while you're actually using the function and writing the function, what name would make sense in that context. Okay. So there also may be cases where you don't want any external name. So let's say, for example, let's bring our add together function back, add together. And I'm gonna make sure that this doesn't have an external name, but I still want to have an internal name because then I can't really do much with the parameters. So let's set this here. Okay, so you'll see that I instead gave these external name nil, so that we don't have any external name. So I'll say let sum equal a plus b and print our sum. And then let's go ahead and call the function add together. And you'll see that it still gives me an indication of what I need to include, that it's an int, but that we don't actually need to have the a and the b. So I could just do 3 and 5 here. And why that completed with the pool. Okay, so add together 3 and 5, and you'll see that we have 8 here. Yeah, that is super weird. I don't know why I changed to bool. Okay, great. So let's go ahead and go through another example of this, of creating these functions. So let's go ahead and say that I've got a variable is on of type bool. And so let's go back to thinking about your flashlight app that you made. Let's say that I want to create a function, and a function again is an action or running specific amount of code to toggle a light switch, okay? So I'm gonna go ahead and name this function toggle light switch. And again, when you're coming up with these function names, make sure that they're super clear, because if you are a programmer and you come into a new company and you're trying to learn their app and learn how things are working, you would want to see really clear function names. And so don't feel bad if the function name seems a little bit long, as long as it's clear what the function is doing and what it's being used for, then we're golden. That's what we want out of a function. So I'm gonna go ahead and say function toggle light switch, okay? So in using this function, I need to check on my isOn property. So I'm gonna say if isOn is equal to true. So if the light switch is on, and I want to toggle the light switch, so I want to set isOn equal to false. And then I'd also want to do the reverse, else toggle to isOn. IsOn is equal to true, okay? So this is just a very simple function that would essentially allow us to toggle based on a bool value, right? And so now I can go ahead and I could say, okay, toggle light switch. And let's go ahead and print isOn so that we can actually see. Okay, run the code here. Okay, so we've got false. I can go ahead and I can call toggle light switch again. And we've got true. Let's toggle it one more time. and we've got false. So you can see that these functions here make it really easy to use these lines of code in multiple places or multiple times, because it would be a pain to have to write this 3 different times. Instead, I can throw it into a function and call that function as many times as I need to. Okay, so let's go ahead, and we are running low on time. I cannot believe how fast the time is going, guys. So let's go ahead and go through one example here. Sorry, let me pull it up here. Get rid of this. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit, very briefly, about default values. So we can give parameters default values. So let's say, for example, that I want to order some food, okay? And I go to this restaurant all the time, and I usually get the same thing. So when I go onto this restaurant's application, I don't want to have to go through the whole ordering process. I'd rather just say order the usual, okay? So let's go ahead, and I'm going to create a function here called function order food. I'm going to do menu item. It's going to be the name of my parameter that I can pass in, and that's going to be of type string. And then I can actually give that a default value. So let's say my go-to food there is going to be a hamburger, okay? And then we'll go ahead and we'll open up the body of that function, and then I can just print off menu item. Okay. So you'll see now that we've got this function set up with a default value. If I go to call the function, I have 2 different options when calling my function. I can simply order food with the default value. So if I play this here, you'll see that it says hamburger. Okay. Or if I'd rather order something else, then I do have those parameters available to me. So I can do order food, and then I can pass in pizza. And then we've got pizza. So that's a quick take on how we can use default values in our coding, okay? So for the last 10 minutes of class, I'm gonna give you 8 minutes so that we can go through it really quick. We're gonna do one more challenge. And let me go ahead, and I'm gonna paste it in the iOS June 11 channel here. Is we're gonna do something similar with what we did for FizzBuzz, or for Lambda School, sorry. But we are going to throw it in a function. And so I want that function to give me the parameters. So what are going to be your, like in our previous example, we did, 3 and 5, and 3 print lambda, and 5 print school, and then if both, do lambda school. So I want you to pass in factor 1, factor 2, and then a limit. And you guys can all, I have the challenge there in the Slack channel, and then I'll put it up here on my screen as well. And I will give you 7 minutes. All right, take about another minute. All right, guys, let's go ahead and run through this really quick. Hopefully you were able to use a lot of the code that you had already written with the previous challenge. So let's go ahead and walk through this really quick. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a function, and let's go ahead and call it lambda school here. Okay, and set up just the initial bare bones of the function. Okay, and then I need 3 parameters, like it says in the instructions. So we need factor 1, which as a factor, we know that it's going to be an integer. And we've got factor 2, which is also going to be an integer. And then we've got our limit, which again is going to be an integer. Okay. So now let's go ahead and set up our for loop. So we'll go ahead and do for number in 0 to our limit. And then we'll check on each of our properties again like we did previously. So if the number modulo factor 1 is equal to 0 and number modulo factor 2 equal to 0, then we want to go ahead and print the school. Okay, and then else if our number modulo factor 1 is equal to 0, we want to print off lambda. And our next else if number modulo 5 is equal to 0, and print school. Okay, and then if all else fails, else print our number here. Okay, so now that our function is set up, we can go ahead and call it. So I'm going to go ahead and just start typing in lambda school. You'll see that it requires our 3 parameters. So we've got factor 1. Let's just do 3. Let's do 5 and do a limit of 100. Go ahead and hit play here. And just like we would expect, we see all of our lambda and schools based on our function. And so you can see how nice that function is for us. Say we needed to use this for different factors or for different limits. This makes it way easier than having to use all of this code again. We can just simply call our function, pass in the parameters, and then the function's ready to go. And we are just about out of time. Let me pull up the screen share again here. And okay. All righty. Cool, guys. Well, thank you for coming to class today. This is the last class of the week. You'll be going through a lot of cool stuff next week. Make sure that you do your homework tonight, and I'll go ahead and post the homework here in the Slack channel. And this is going to be some more practice going through loops and functions. feel free to reach out on Slack to people in the group or to your TAs if you need any help with it. I know we had to go through kind of a lot of material and not a lot of time. But thanks again, guys, for coming. And best of luck to you on the practice.